Hello, I'm José Olivares, and welcome to Salon Chingón, a podcast where we discuss investigative journalism, social movements, and political developments worldwide. This podcast is a production from the Salon of Authentic Journalism. Now, this episode is going to be a quick one, but we're going to be recapping some important things that we need to know about political developments, especially when it comes to the relations between the U.S. government, the United States government, and the Trump administration, and the Mexican government. It's been a couple of weeks that have been very heavy when it comes to this, especially when it comes to the drug war, the U.S. and Mexican drug war, and development. So to begin, a couple of weeks ago, just a couple of weeks ago in mid-late April, there was a very bombshell, explosive news that came out. The U.S. ambassador to Mexico announced on Twitter that or X, right, as formerly known as Twitter, announced that two U.S. embassy officials had died in an operation in the state of Chihuahua. Now, the state of Chihuahua is the biggest state in Mexico. It's a northern state in Mexico, and it shares a border with Texas and New Mexico, and it's huge, right? The city of El Paso is the sister city to Ciudad Juárez, which is one of the biggest cities in the state of Chihuahua. Now, the U.S. ambassador came out and said, two U.S. embassy officials died in the state of Chihuahua. And then reporters started digging and they found that the two U.S. embassy officials who died were actually CIA officials. Now, these were two CIA officials that were in the state of Chihuahua. And the official story goes that the two CIA officials were working with the local state Chihuahua government in order to do some counter-narcotics operations. Specifically, they went to some methamphetamine labs to decommission them and to take them down. And after the Attorney General's office in the state of Chihuahua, the state government, after they did this counter-narcotics operation with the meth labs in Chihuahua, four CIA officials traveled to view. Now, this is the official story, right? When they were returning from viewing the decommissioning of this meth lab, two CIA officials, along with two state government officials, they were driving on the highway. Chihuahua is a very mountainous state. They went off a cliff or off the side of the mountain. The car landed, exploded. The two CIA officials and the two Chihuahua state government officials died in that car crash, in that explosion. Now, that's the official story, right? And when this came out, the federal government, led by Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, they came out and they said, whoa, what's going on here? What is happening? We had no idea that CIA officials were operating in the state of Chihuahua in partnership with the state government of Chihuahua. Now, this is interesting, right? Because the Mexican national security law prohibits any sort of official to collaborate with U.S. agencies or other international agencies without the approval and the understanding and the knowledge of the Mexican federal government. So this became a very difficult situation, right? We've seen under the Trump administration that the CIA has been tasked with more counter-narcotics operations, right? This has been a very strong hill that the Trump administration has wanted to die on, right? Is using the CIA and special forces to conduct these sort of operations throughout Latin America, right? With the CIA. And this is a very challenging and tricky thing, right, for the government of Claudia Sheinbaum, right? Mexico obviously is a very proud country, and they don't want any interference from the U.S. government. But at the same time, they're facing this threat from the Trump administration, and they're having these intelligence officers or CIA agents, whoever they were, doing clandestine operations in the state of Chihuahua. Now, so the government of Claudia Sheinbaum came out and said, we hope this operation between the state government of Chihuahua and the CIA was a one-off. We hope that the state government of Chihuahua has not been collaborating or coordinating with U.S. federal agencies without our approval. They launched an investigation. Now, what's interesting to note here is that the governor of Chihuahua, she's from the opposition, the right-wing PAN party, which makes things even more complicated, right? Now, After all this came out, I was looking at the news and I realized that it was actually quite interesting, right? Because last October, I traveled to the state of Chihuahua and I met with Chihuahua state officials who worked for the Secretariat, the Department of Public Security for the state of Chihuahua. Now, the state of Chihuahua, the Department of Public Security, they're constructing this massive surveillance tower. It's a 20-story surveillance tower, 20 floors. It's super tall, it's super high, right in the middle of downtown Ciudad Juarez, right? This tower is being constructed, and this tower you can see it from across the border, from El Paso, right? You can see it from Texas, and it's a massive surveillance tower. Now, there's going to be separate floors where the different officials are going to be based, but on the 18th floor is going to be the intelligence sharing center, right? Now, what this means is that the command center, this command center, is going to be shared between local officials, state officials, but also there's going to be at least two Mexican federal officials stationed there, reviewing intelligence files, reviewing surveillance data that kind of covers the entire state of Chihuahua, right? Now, the Mexican federal officials that will be involved are the National Guard and the Army, right? Now, in October, when I visited the state, they took me to the command center, right? Not the one in the tower because that hasn't been constructed yet, but they took me to one of the command centers, and I was, they have quite an impressive surveillance apparatus, right? They have cameras throughout the entire state. They have fleets of drones. They have helicopters. They have panic buttons. They have just cameras stationed at highways, cameras stationed on the streets, and local citizens from the state of Chihuahua. They can voluntarily connect their own surveillance cameras to this infrastructure, right? They call it Plataforma Centinela is the name of this surveillance infrastructure. Now, the entire state of Chihuahua is being very closely surveilled by these state officials in partnership with the Mexican federal officials and the local state officials. But what was really interesting about this and what's relevant to the CIA story is that when I was in Chihuahua, the state officials working for the Department of Public Security for the state of Chihuahua, they confirmed to me that on the 18th floor of the surveillance tower, once it's constructed, DEA, FBI, ATF, CBP, and Homeland Security officials are going to have representatives who are going to be working out of that intelligence center, reviewing the reams of intelligence that the state and federal officials are gathering from this tower, right? Now, it's quite interesting, right? Because again, it brings up this question of the national security law, right? How is it possible that these five different US government agencies are going to have representatives inside this tower conducting these intelligence sharing operations along with the state officials, right? It's unknown if the federal government from Clara Sheinbaum knows about these representatives that either will be visiting or will be based there inside this tower. But it brings up a lot of questions, right? In terms of how much does the federal government actually know and how much do they want to let on? And also, what is the extent of the local state Chihuahua government and their collaboration with the US government? Now, as part of this, I also found that there were a number of operations that the state government officials had conducted in partnership or in coordination with or with the knowledge of these five U.S. government agencies, right? There's one operation where the state officials, they were surveilling with drones this high-ranking Sinaloa cartel trafficker, and they were able to arrest this guy. But this guy was one of the, he was on the most wanted list by the FBI. And after this operation, the FBI went to the command center and presented the award to the surveillance analysts working with the state government who were able to track this cartel trafficker, right? There's other operations that they do. The state officials, they sent some undercover officials to surveil a migrant camp in the state of Chihuahua, and they were sharing that information, that intelligence that they gathered from inside the migrant camp with Customs and Border Protection and other U.S. federal government agencies. Now, how much of this does the federal government know in Mexico? We don't know. If Sheinbaum's claims are true, that she did not know that the U.S. government was working with state officials in Chihuahua, well, then that brings up a lot of questions in terms of how much are these three-letter agencies, these five agencies, right? The DEA, the FBI, HSI, CBP, and ATF, and now the CIA, how much are they actually working in Mexico, and how much are they actually working alongside state government officials, right? So this has blown up to be quite a significant political scandal, bringing up questions of sovereignty for Mexico and how much they allow the United States government to intervene when it comes to the drug war in Mexico, right? But as all this is going on, as this scandal is striking and is hitting the news, the president is being questioned, etc. The United States government this week, the Southern District of New York, the federal court in Manhattan, in New York City, they unsealed an indictment accusing the governor of Sinaloa, the state of Sinaloa. They accused him of drug trafficking and conspiring to traffic with the Sinaloa cartel, right? Not only him, but a bunch of other officials from the state of Chihuahua. Now, this was quite a bombshell crisis, right? So we've seen how the war in Sinaloa has played out for years and years and years now, right? But in the past few years, things have really escalated in the state of Chihuahua, right? Just a little bit of history here. So the Sinaloa cartel is one of Mexico's biggest criminal groups in the country, right? The Sinaloa cartel and the new generation Jalisco cartel, they are the two main large organizations that are always constantly being surveilled and under the watch of the US government, right? The US government has conducted operation after operation after operation trying to take down the Sinaloa cartel, right? Including one of its former leaders, El Chapo. Right? I mean, everybody knows El Chapo Guzman, right? Sitting in a federal prison now, in a secure federal prison here in the United States. But the US government has been really closely watching the developments within the Sinaloa cartel. Now, in 2024, there was this very mysterious operation, right, where El Mayo Zambada was essentially El Chapo's boss, you could say. He was a higher ranking leader of the Sinaloa cartel. Now, El Mayo Zambada was summoned to a meeting, and it was a very strange meeting. He was hit over the head. He was, handcuffed, and he was placed in a truck, placed on an airplane, and then they flew that airplane over the border, landed in the United States, and turned him over to the FBI and HSI. Well, who did that? El Chapo's sons, right? So you have El Chapo's sons going against El Mayo Zambada, right? Their father's former boss. And now the cartel has split. The war has begun in the state of Sinaloa, and it's become a very, very deadly, year plus battle and war that has been taking place in the state of Sinaloa between the El Mayo faction of the Sinaloa cartel, led by his son, and the Chapitos faction of the Sinaloa cartel, led by two of El Chapo's sons. Now, this has been quite a significant development, right? Because we've seen now with the explosion of this war, accusations being thrown around that state government officials in the state of Sinaloa, including the current governor or the governor of Sinaloa, Rubén Rocha Moya, coordinating and collaborating with the Chapitos faction of the Sinaloa cartel. Now, this indictment that came out this week is fascinating because we see that the United States government is actively accusing a sitting Mexican official of conducting work with the Sinaloa cartel, right? But the other problem is that this governor, Rubén Rocha Moya, who, in my opinion, is probably guilty of having some corrupt dealings, of course, but this governor is a member of Claudia Sheinbaum's political party, right? And so now Sheinbaum is in an even trickier situation, right? Where she has to decide whether to conduct an operation to arrest Rubén Rocha Moya, the governor, and extradite him to the United States, or allow him to roam free, giving the Trump administration more fuel in its aggressive tactics and its aggression and militaristic tactics against the Mexican government. So we're in a very tricky place here. Now, the United States government has requested or is probably going to request the extradition of Rubén Rocha Moya. The governor this week he stepped down from office, and he said, "I'm temporarily stepping down just due to the political scandal." And so it's going to be a really tricky test to see if Claudia Sheinbaum's government ends up following through with the arrest of this governor and then extraditing him to the United States. However, here is where the problem lies. The Mexican government is requesting all of the evidence that the United States has against the governor of Sinaloa, right? They're saying, no, 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 we're not going to make a decision about anything until we see all of the evidence. But here is the problem. The United States government historically has not really provided much evidence when it comes to extradition requests. Now, this is a really interesting thing, right? Because we've seen separate examples of politically delicate cases, especially in Colombia, where the Colombian government requested extradition evidence from the United States government, and the United States government said, no, 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 no. What we gave you, the indictment and maybe a couple of affidavits from DEA agents, that's enough for an extradition. We're not going to give you any more, right? So it places the Mexican government in this tricky situation, right? Where, there's questions now well, okay, is the United States government going to share all the evidence that they have with the Mexican government? It's very doubtful, mostly because these processes are very long processes. And when it comes to actually gathering evidence, a lot of it can be based on the testimony from cooperating witnesses or US government informants that are feeding information to the United States government, right? How much of that will be shared with the Mexican government? We don't know, especially if intelligence agencies and national security agencies are involved now that the Sinaloa cartel and these other organizations have been declared terrorist groups by the United States. So it's a very tricky situation in Mexico and with the U.S. We see the heightened aggression by the Trump administration placed on Mexico for these counter-narcotics operations. And now the United States government is targeting a direct member of the Morena party, which is Claudia Sheinbaum's, the president's political party. Very interesting developments, very tricky developments. But I think it's important to note that this is just a broader expansion of the United States and Mexican drug war. It's really been interesting to see how the United States agencies have continued to develop their operations in Mexico, right? I mean, there's no surprise that the CIA is involved, right? I mean, we've seen the CIA involved in counter-narcotics operations and intelligence operations throughout Latin America in the past, decades and decades, right? So that's not really a surprise. But what's interesting is kind of the absurdity of it all, right? Of the United States government wanting to impose its will on Mexico, right? Regardless if Rubén Rocha Moya, the governor of Sinaloa, is corrupt, regardless if he is found to be corrupt, if he is found to be dealing with the Sinaloa cartel, this brings up a lot of questions about United States government's interference in the region. I think what's interesting to point out here is the United States government is very aferrado. They're very intent on following through and continuing this war on drugs. But I think a clear example of how much of the war on drugs is a sham is what we saw the United States government do just recently, right? At the end of 2025. The United States government, they freed, the Trump administration pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez. Juan Orlando Hernandez was the president of Honduras. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison by the same Manhattan federal court for drug trafficking, right? Juan Orlando Hernandez was called the narco dictator of Honduras. He ruled the country for years and years. He changed the Supreme Court. He changed the Constitution in his favor. And while he was in power, he was allowing drug smuggling to come through, lining his pockets, and engaging in extreme repression against the Honduran people who were rising up and challenging this right-wing narco dictator. But because Juan Orlando Hernandez, this former president of Honduras, because he was tight with the Trump administration during the first term, now the Trump administration has pardoned him and allowed him to go free, despite him being found guilty in the United States court of conspiracy and of trafficking cocaine to the United States. Now, I think the Hernandez example is the clearest example of why people say, and why a lot of us say, that the drug war is a complete sham, that nothing is going to be won, and that a lot of these are political maneuvers for the Trump administration to have a stronger grip on Latin America and on the region more broadly. So that is going to be it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, this is Salon Chingón. I'm José Olivares, and we will see you next time.